report. Okay, so today's topic, finding and selecting a vendor. So I'm going to discuss reconnaissance, going to the market, seeing what's out there who can do this particular job for you, and identify potential candidates, in effect, for doing the work. How are we going to attract interest, get these people, vendors I mean, to come to us with suitable proposals for doing the work. And very important, and narrowing the search obviously. Very important, that's better, been on my feet for 2 hours. Confirming their capabilities, which is one of the, I would say also, critical areas where a lot of these large outsourcing deals, in my experience, go wrong. That we, broadly speaking, take the word of the vendor that they can do a particular outsourcing job for us, and in fact, they can't. And I'm going to discuss an approach how we might handle that, either today or in a short video case a little bit later on. So where are we in the outsourcing life cycle? We're looking at reconnaissance, checking out what's out there. We've made a broad decision based on last time's discussion that there is a service within our organization that we could in principle outsource, and there's a business justification for that. If you remember last time, one of the things that we must as managers do in our everyday work, and particularly when we're considering a business option like outsourcing, is to ground that decision in an appropriate business case. So I'm assuming we've got a business case for us, that we know why we're doing this, and we know therefore what to say to our suppliers in terms of this is the principal objective of the deal which is on offer, and you can tailor your bid to do that. So I'm assuming that stuff is more or less in place. So we then need to think about finding some people and preparing the whole story, and moving into this selection process, which we do by the classic request for information, request for a proposal, quotation type of techniques, which I'll cover later on. I've done a lot of these. There's still a very, very active market, despite what you might hear in the press. It is still pretty intensive in terms of outsourcing. Tends to be a lot of second and even now third generation outsourcing contracts are being closed. What that means is that some years ago now, we went through this era of putting together some large outsourcing deals, and they're now coming to term. Contracts are coming to their term, 5, 10 years, wherever it happens to be, and now organizations are now thinking about recontracting with the incumbent suppliers, or placing it on the market and finding somebody new, or even bringing it back in-house because the business has changed dramatically. And so you see a very, very active market in the UK. My colleagues in the NOA report still many, many billions of pounds worth of outsourcing done on a year's basis, and still a lot of mega deals going on, some good, some bad. But I just thought I'd put up this, that one of the interesting things is that the majority of deals that are being closed are with new suppliers, or new partnerships, if I can put it like that. A result of coming to term, or outsourcing for the first time, or simply you find a supplier that offers a better deal. A lot of the contracts which are being signed are in fact new. And what that means is a lot of us have to go through this type of process, request for information, request for proposal, and all the rest of it, and a revalidation of the business case quite often when we're going through this process. So it's not a simple matter of, as you might think, coming to term, then you re-sign the contract again with the incumbent supplier, and you go off again for another 5 years. There's a great deal of churn in contracting terms in this particular market. So it's very intensively competitive, lots of new entrants, a lot of activity from consultants and advisors in how to do this correctly, because there are some issues, as we'll see later on. Now, the outsourcing model, as we saw later on, is developed, and the model drives the configuration. What that means is, once we've worked out what particular part of the service we wish to outsource of our own organisation, we then need to think about how that's going to work in the future with what is in effect a new part of the organisation provided by the supplier. These parts have to work coherently to provide the end service to our customers on the outside world. And so one of the first things we think of when we are about to enter the process of selection of a vendor is, okay, what's the scope, or as I put it here in brackets, the division of responsibilities between ourselves as the outsourcing company and the vendor coming in to do the service for us. Because you will find, and particularly on some of the cases I'll mention, that this has not been done historically well in some circumstances. And what you find are gaps between the organisations about who should be doing what. And as a result, poor service experience, lack of flexibility, and all sorts of nasty things that we hear about in the press when things go wrong. So it is quite important for us to work out who is doing what, is the basic question you have to ask yourself. Once you've decided what you're going to outsource, then who's going to do what? What is delivered in a precise way? I know this may sound rather obvious, but you do need to think through this just a little bit. What is it exactly you are asking the vendor to do? Are you asking them to provide a service desk, the service desk personnel, the software that runs on the service desk? Are you providing the location for where the service desk is located? Will it be the only service desk within your company? How are you going to jointly manage the costs of the service desk down? And believe me, on all of those last 5 or so items I just mentioned, I can point to examples where that has not been sorted out up front. And just as a case in point dropped into my head there, that, for example, the Unilever Unisys particular contract, which I know something about, in that case, Unilever assumed that Unisys would be using the Unilever software to manage the service desk. This was not, let's say, properly communicated or understood by the supplier, who assumed that they would be using their own industry standard service desk software, in this case, to manage the contract. And so right up front, you have these situations about who is doing what. Furthermore, in the Unilever case, they have inside their organisation what looks pretty much like a service desk operation which manages user requests that are in parallel or sit in parallel with the Unisys, unfortunate choice of supplier and buyer here. Also Unisys have a service desk operation facing off the clients, the real consumers. This is a recipe for confusion, and it's a recipe for not achieving any financial benefits. So sorting out who is doing what precisely must be delivered, where the service must be done, is also quite important. If there is an element of offshoring, for example, you need to know that. In financial services, some aspects of offshoring, particularly of data management and data protection, needs to be very, very carefully thought through. So you need to know what your expectations are and whether or not you can tolerate having things like your data managed in foreign locales. That applies particularly in some European countries like Germany, where there's very strict controls on where data can be held. And I think it's still true that data cannot be held, or core personal data cannot be held on systems outside of Germany, for example. And how precisely the service is to be delivered, what element of offshoring, what's the split, are there any subcontractors, for example? All of these things need to be fairly carefully understood. Also, in one of the other Unilever operational things I looked at, and this involved HP providing some services, in this case mainframe and bitframe. They did not have anybody in their organization, HP that is, who could fully provide that service in South America. Consequently, HP had to engage subcontractors to do that for them in South America. Now that should, and rather obviously, those subcontractors may not have in place the full processes and techniques that Hewlett-Packard, in this case, operate. And that's something which Unilever should be very aware of before they let the contract. How is the service to be delivered? Are you the only people to be delivering this? And are there any subcontractors, etc., involved? Last time I mentioned, for example, in terms of data protection, one of the big leakages in data protection, particularly in offshore locations in India, is the use of subcontractors within the outsourcing contract to manage an element of the service. And where perhaps the outsourcer has not fully checked whether or not the subcontractors are fully compliant with all the legal requirements of data protection and the rest of it. And obviously we know in some cases that was not the case, and data found itself on the open market. So this little simple model here: sort out your demands, what's the service you actually require, decide on the service concept. What that means is, how are these two organizations in the future going to work together to deliver this particular service? Yeah? What's the service model? Basic operations stuff. What's the service package? What organizations do we need? What governance? What management structures do we need? What systems should we use? Should we use our systems, or should we use the vendor systems? It is a particular choice. But you need to work out how this whole thing is going to look like after it has been implemented. Then we actually got to deliver it, which is the whole transition story, that yes, we have a good bid, it looks a good proposal, the savings look reasonable. All right, how are we physically going to put that into operation? Very, very important part, often underestimated, both in terms of time, effort, money, all the usual project type things, but also in terms of managing the people who are going, if that's necessary, the people who are going to be transitioned to the new vendor, how that's handled. And I can tell you, in most cases, extremely badly. But we'll have a special session on that. Now, during vendor selection, we run through these processes, and I'll just touch on them. What's my time again? So the input whole of this thing is up on the left here, the service requirements. That's what I've just been describing. Now we need to define these requirements for such that the vendor can understand them. And so they need to be posed typically in statements of work, term familiar, basically a list of what you need in detail from the supplier, and what they think you need them to do in terms of the management, in terms of the specific service deliverables, listed in detail. Not vague, not high level, but this is what must be done. And when the vendor has that, the vendor is very happy with that, to be quite honest. I was very happy when we had a detailed statement of work from the buyer. We then knew what we had to do. So we knew our scope, because a problem we have during contracting is always this definition of precisely what is the scope of what you need me to do. Make sense, Christian? Yeah? We are a friendly buyer here, so that's always useful. Then we need to think about producing a request for information, request for a proposal. The distinction, I'll put that together in a moment, which is a formal approach to find out what they can do for us in some detail. You might have seen the request for a proposal as a request for quotation. That's also commonly used. So requirements: produce an RFI RFP. They do some work, and in a big contract, one thing I will say right up front is that make sure you, as an outsourcer, really wants to do this. It is nothing more frustrating than buyers putting out fishing expeditions to find out what's going on with no real intention to close a contract deal at the end of it. Putting together a bid for a decent-sized outsourcing, which the Unisys Unilever contract is £250 million, will cost the vendors, and there will be several of these, a lot of money to put that together. I've been in very, very big bid teams to do this, when you have lots and lots of people making slides and what have you. But there's a lot of work to be done, particularly on the financials, to get a decent proposal together. And it takes a lot of work, a lot of effort, and costs a lot of money. So be sure you want to do it. We will evaluate those responses when we come back. In a request for information, typically we'll have quite a few of these, high level, and from that we're going to make a selection of who we think can do the job. That's the broad line about it. Select the vendor candidates. Who are the 2 or 3, maybe 3, who can, all of them could do it, and we're going to make a choice out of these candidates. We're then going to do a process known as due diligence, which means looking, in effect, what the supplier can do now. Can they actually do this? I know perhaps you also have to look at the finances and whether or not they're stable and all of these good things. But the most important thing from an operations perspective is to really define whether or not they can do it, because it's often not so clear. A vendor will tell you as a buyer, more or less, they can do everything. I don't think I've ever come up with anybody, so sorry, this is a very attractive contract, and I know it's several £100 million, but unfortunately we can't do it for you. So you have to go to one of our competitors. Quite rare. And so most vendors will in some way or other suggest that there is no scope that is out of order. Would you agree with that, Christian?
Yes.
Yeah, Christian agrees with that, so I must be on the right track there. Yeah? So conducting due diligence is being diligent and finding out what is due. It's in the words, yeah? We diligently look what they have to do, what they're promising they will do for us. Then we select one, of course. So we work out which one we want. No champagne yet, okay, but we're getting closer. So we select the candidate who can do the job, usually with a backup, just in case that the rest of it fails. Then we move into negotiation, which I'll also cover a little bit on this course as well. So working, and you do a special course on negotiation next year by one of the people who has never done any negotiation. But and so they're going to show you all about negotiating tactics and approaches and some of the rules, and I'll show you some of the tricks as well. And if you get through all that lot, and we've negotiated a reasonable deal and everybody's happy, not quite at champagne yet, then we go into the contract agreement. That is where all of the project in outsourcing terms is de-risked, and so where the final scope of the contract is defined, the final financials and service levels and all the rest are handled during the contract agreement phase. And then we say, yes, we're going to do it. Then you can have the warm champagne. Yeah, everybody's happy. And at that point, just where the pink arrow is, just before we actually start doing something, is the only time in the entire process where everybody likes each other. And we're all happy and smiling. After that, it goes downhill. Okay? Oh, God, yes. Yes, memorandum of understanding. When the requirements are known, tender pack is created. How the tender is lodged, so there are lots of formalities, it's not so important, but I'll just mention them. Where it's going to be lodged, the tender closing date, location for tendering, all that. It all depends. Defence, they're very, very strict, and so you really have to put it in a brown envelope, along with the £5 notes, and take that at a certain time, certain location, hand it in, must be done. And they're really, really strict on it, and you just have to ring them up the night before, so, and just, we need an extra couple of days, and they're fine. But in principle, all of these things must be properly done. In terms of tender, conditions the tenderer has to observe when submitting, so you've got to put all these things in there. For example, I am quite sure that if you're on the buyer side, that when you're in the tunnel of making, excuse me, when you're in the tunnel of making a contract, then the vendors, in this case, can only go through a nominated person. Yeah? Why do they do that? Yeah? So in a normal tender or in a normal process such as this, you are not allowed to speak to anyone else other than usually the contract manager or the bid manager on the customer side. Why do we do that? Circumstances, particularly with large consultancies, they will try whatever way possible to get past the contract manager and the bid managers in order to speak to senior management to sell their wares and to try and get advantage. And this is tightly controlled, usually, in formal processes, particularly in the public sector. And you are not allowed to speak to anyone else other than usually the procurement officer who's handling this. And it's to control this sort of opportunistic behaviour that we talked about before. So in terms of tender, validity and all the rest of it. Conditions of the contract, what you must comply with, all that pretty standard stuff. Contractual schedules and spreadsheets sets out the various schedules for the tenderer to fill in. Now this is quite important actually, funnily enough. More important than you might think. All that is you send out standard formats, perhaps spreadsheets even, Excel spreadsheets, already filled in, and you constrain all of the responders to your contract to fill them in a certain way. Why you do that? So you compare things. Because believe it, it's unbelievable being on both sides. And give them a chance, and they'll put it in any way they want. They put a whole load of fluff and pictures of people and smiling from the last contract they did and how wonderful they are and all this good stuff. And you never get to actually what are you going to do for me, and how much it's going to cost, and all of these sorts of things. So you want to constrain them into the way that you will objectively evaluate against several potential providers. And to do that, you standardize things. Standardize things is good. Saves time later on. Service specs, statement of work, and all the usual stuff. Those are the major components you need to think about to put together. Sounds like a lot. When you're talking hundreds of millions of pounds, this is no big shakes, yeah? Okay, the vendor selection approach. Outsourcing team, you put somebody in charge of it. Defines the selection criteria in advance. Why would I define the selection criteria in advance? It's rather obvious. Yeah? Quite, because you can, very probably eliminate the no-hopers very early on. If you're dealing with, remember last time I mentioned, would you outsource, if you're a small company, to IBM? I can't remember the exact thing we used. To some extent, there's a knockout criteria. Yeah? If you're going to outsource a very, very big operation, a very big chunk of your company in a global sense, then obviously you're going to want to select a vendor who has global scale, other things being equal, and has proven capability in your area of business, preferably your industry sector. If not, out. That's the bottom line. Second reason why you do this is that you don't want to do that during the bid process. So you have all of these bids in. Oh, which one's the best out of all these things? I'm not really sure. No, you set down your criteria before. What's the price I want? What's the way I want it delivered? And so on. And also then it helps you objectively, at least to start an objective evaluation when you get this stuff, all of these bids coming back to you. So you do it for two reasons, yeah? So kick out the ones which are no-hopers, and to be in the process of evaluation. You are already right up front thinking about how am I going to select this particular person. When you hire somebody to work for you, you normally write out a person's specification, yeah? And so this is the type of person I want, yeah? Eyebrows, hair, and all this sort of stuff. That as well, perhaps. But all of these things you set out beforehand. Seriously, the qualifications you need, the type of experience, and so forth. Exactly the same for this here. Do they fit culturally and organisationally? Roughly the same size, roughly the same culture as us. Do they have explicit domain experience, i.e. they know something about my particular area, they're good quality, they're technically capable to do this. Up front, roughly speaking what they can do, we're going to check it, yeah? Don't take a vendor's word for anything. They're not dishonest, not at all. But they like to window dress things, yeah? We can do everything. What do you want? You've got the money, we can do it. And so you just really need to check that later on. And any risk-reward balance that you might think of, any gain share stuff as well. Yeah?
Right, I have a question. When selecting your criteria, would it be good the strategy to share it with your vendors so they can focus on where you need?
Should be in your bid document. As I mentioned last time or whenever, that when you've decided on what this is about in your business case, you will put in the bid document basically your selection criteria. Perhaps if you're that formal, you may have a suitable formula to weight the various elements. You tell them that as well. Yeah? And then they can tailor their bid to what you want. Yeah? I mentioned before, keep it consistent, all that good stuff, but once you've worked out in your business case why you're doing this and how you're going to select them, tell them. Yeah? It's important. Then there's no excuses, as it were, later on, and they can tailor the bid exactly to what you want. So this is what this looks like in just a nice, more graphic way. Domain experience, get the risk-reward balance sorted. What sort of innovation do you require? Innovation costs money, so if you want innovation, if you want flexibility, if you want to be able to adapt to your business, tell them up front, and then they will come back with a rock-bottom price for you. Yeah? Technical capabilities rather obvious. What's the resources look like? I mentioned later on. Have a look at them as well. The people you'll see in the bid will be people like Christian on the bid team, the account managers and all the rest of it, do everything fantastic. The people who really need to know who can do it are the people who do the work. So you need to check those out later on. And domain experience. If you want a global supplier, don't go for a local garage operation. You go for a global supplier, yeah, who can actually do it. Because if you do, you make some terrible mistakes, believe me. Now, what the vendor is basically offering is, as a proposition, is a productivity gain, aren't they? If you think about it. What they're saying is, we can do all of these things for you, service capabilities, and with you, complementary assets, we can improve your business in some way or other. And that can be, we know how to manage IT far better than you do, because we have competence, we're a big organisation, all of our people are trained. You have a tiny little IT organisation compared with us. They're not capable of keeping up with the technology, etc. Therefore, we are much more capable of carrying out that service for you at a better price. And with your part of the pie, the joint service relationship, you're both jointly creating the service, then you can get some improvements. And that can be all sorts. It can be, obviously, cost reductions, which usually kicks off this entire process. But more importantly, flexibility, technology refresh, innovation, new business processes, operational improvements, and so on. All of these things can be enabled by getting in another organisation, yeah? Let me have a think while I have a... What do you think? So we asked these clients and vendors and large-scale surveys to the NOA. I wrote a report on it. Okay, surveys, the end results, yeah? So what they have to do, so how the service is delivered, what are the end results, and attention to detail with, in their opinion, some of the things that they look for, yeah? The suppliers, we asked them at the same time, particularly with a pinch of salt, but they were looking more at end results. That makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah. In terms of a vendor, looking at how what this is going to deliver and in what ways the improvement is going to be there and how they as vendor are going to succeed. There's a lot tied up with the end results of the entire process. The people, that sort of popped in there as well, team working, the people management side, that was very, very important for them. And last was, or on this top three anyway, was actually how the service is delivered. Yeah? So take that as you will. So end results very important from the supplier perspective, service very important from the buyer perspective. Yeah? So effective vendor selection is key to outsourcing, I mentioned right at the start. And selection must be based on demonstrable core competence or demonstrable competence in general. So how well can this vendor do the job? Can they do it, and can they show us that they can do it, not just talk about it? Now when we start out initially, and we're perhaps doing our first outsourcing, we don't know really. We can sort it out later in due diligence. What we tend to do a little bit too much right at the beginning is rely on market reputation. We must allow the vendor to apply competences. If a vendor has been doing service desk management for many, many years, one can assume they know what they're doing. And they probably do know what they're doing. That's not a flippant remark. And so let them do it. If you hire a vendor to carry out your service desk operation, do not impose on that vendor your own software solution to manage the service desk. That is absolutely crazy. Good service level agreement, but control of fulfillment with the vendor. That means let the vendor do the job. You manage the service by service level agreements. The vendor does the job based on their world-class processes and techniques. Don't impose your own. Investment in the client-side relationship is important to ensure also that learning of vendor process is internalized. That's quite important. That we need to be sure that when we hire a good vendor, that we can learn from them. Somebody mentioned it. Knowledge sharing. Being able to manage projects, manage services. You can learn from your vendors as well, and which you can use elsewhere in your business. So a good vendor is one of the selection criteria you might want to think about. It's an aspect of innovation and flexibility. So check is also made from the supplier side. This is also important, often forgotten. So we've checked from the buyer side. This is what I want. These are the types of competencies that the vendor must demonstrate to me in the end. Also from the vendor side, they have to do some checking as well about your business, what it's about, what makes it tick. And so how is it cost management, risk reduction, market advantage, and all of these things need to be checked. And where a vendor can add value. Where can a vendor add value through their skills, tools and processes to the business? As well as all these concrete aspects, a relationship is also very important in any large-scale inter-firm. Good two-way communications are needed. And you can assess this with the final 2 or 3 candidates before you make your final choice. Are they the type of organisation that are fairly open with you and are willing to share things? So it starts to develop a relationship right at the early stages. I say it ensures rapport, so once you're in a bid process, you get to know them a little bit. You understand how they tick and understand their processes. Now it ensures rapport and mitigates faking. If you can get a good relationship at an early stage with a candidate vendor, it may help prevent what I call faking and opportunistic behaviour. It may trade with you more openly and more fair. The relationship and how it started is critical to the overall outsourcing success. More so in the first steps in the transition. When you learn about your vendor, how they work, that sets the whole thing for sometimes many years in a certain way. So if they're good, if they're open, if they're managing the service correctly, if they have good account management processes, that can all help build a long-term successful relationship with, between the parties. At the start and during negotiations, all of this phase, they're learning about each other. They're learning about, as an organisation, as working as a team. And this is quite important to ensure outsource success. Just the main differences between an RFP and RFI, just to get us all on the same page. Now, a request for a proposal, typically, request for information, sorry, I'll start on the right-hand side. Typically, large number of potential vendors. In outsourcing, for me, large is greater than 5. If you have a very big outsourcing contract on offer, £250 million and above, then obviously there's not many people who can do that, and so it's going to be quite restricted. So that sort of order. It's limited in scope. You don't put all of the details in there, not too much anyway. And it's all about getting information from the industry about who can do this and in what way. So you're requesting information, and you may not ask for pricing. More and more common to ask for pricing, or at least to give indications of pricing. Request for a proposal, small number of vendors, it'll be much less than 4. Typically, big contract, 2, maybe 3. It's fully comprehensive, contains all of the full Monty, everything you need to know about the particular deal, and it goes to specific vendors, basically, the ones who can, in principle, all of them could do it. That's more or less it. So you pick those, and you tend to ask for the price in your standard layouts. So it tends to be more detail. You've narrowed them down a little piece to focus yourself, and you're now more or less in the tunnel of finding the right people to do the job. Proposal must be appropriate for the service. You don't need all this process for buying pencils or even a small-scale outsourcing opportunity. But if you're looking at specific, highly transformational types of approaches with a very, very complex, perhaps a total outsourcing might be in that sort of arena, then you may be talking about a single source type of approach rather than going through all of this, this filtering process. Are there any risks with single sourcing, do you think? There are a lot of vendors out there doing all sorts of services, and they all sound quite reasonable, and they all have quite a degree of competence, which we can check on. So you need some process to filter them out, to get yourself down to some sort of limited number to look at. But in some cases, when you have a limited field, meaning a limited number of people who can actually do the job, perhaps because of its complexity, especially geographical scope, more and more, then you need to have slightly nuance these and be a bit practical. Service specification underpins the RFI and the RFP. Service spec describes the service to be provided, as I mentioned earlier. Yeah. What do you expect? Standards. Acknowledge any future changes. One of the things which is most often missed in an outsourcing is what happens when things change in the future. Because you do not want to be tied too closely into a contract that may be for a long period of time, 7, 10 years, which may even extend over several economic cycles, and your business could change out of all recognition over that time. And you may be stuck, as some of the early outsourcing organizations were, with very long-term deals, and their business had basically disappeared from under them, and they were stuck with these contracts. So there will be changes, and you need to acknowledge all that. Proposal evaluation assesses the ability to create a good proposal only. Yeah? So that's what it's about. So people are able to put together a nice, well-presented, well-put-together proposal. Now we need to check it. Yeah? So proposal evaluation assesses the ability to create a good proposal, checks the match of the proposed scope and responsibility with what we intended. So rather obviously, if you send to a vendor, this is what we want, here is the service scope, here are the people involved and all the rest of it, you expect to see that back in the proposal which they send to you. If it's not, they've misunderstood the proposal, and it means that the pricing they've put in there is more or less meaningless and is not well grounded. Restates the financial case based on proposal scope, etc. Validation, but beware of compliant bids. You will ask your supplier normally to indicate in the last column of the spreadsheet whether or not they can do it, yes or no, particularly for mandatory requirements. There is a great temptation in 100% of cases for suppliers to reply yes to everything. Yeah? I don't know why we ask them even sometimes, but okay. At least in principle, if they're honest, oh sorry, we cannot do this core requirement in your project, therefore we're going to get kicked out. No, that's never going to happen. So there's a great temptation for vendors to present compliant bids. So validate it, but be aware that most vendors will say to you that they are compliant over all aspects of the statement of work, all aspects of the service level, and the management and governance. They will state, perhaps with minor caveats, which don't mean very much, but they will state that they can do it. So be aware of it. References, then visits to the current clients and vendors to assess the general capability. Yeah? Do that, even if I don't say it on this particular slide, independently of the vendor. Go to other clients and have a look, see how they got on, and particularly how they transitioned the whole thing. Be very aware of when a vendor proposes to you a certain person at one of their other client sites to show you how things went and to describe how wonderful they are. It's very, very risky. You need to get direct contact with other clients and references and make your own reference visits without the vendor being present. Now the vendor won't like that. We never liked it, but it's something you have to put up with as a vendor. As clients are more and more savvy, they need to talk to the real people involved in the service to see how well it was delivered. Obviously, quality of proposals, transition plan, who are the resources, are they financially stable or not going to go bankrupt next week, and general coherence, so it all sticks together. Not too much boilerplate. Evaluating for technical and financial competence. Makes sense there, obviously. Evaluate compliance to the mandatories, check compliance to tender process, everything is all done, and then look at all of the detail and financial objectives. Now the important thing when you look at the financials is to make sure it stacks up. If you have somebody who has put in a bid which is, well, let's say half the price, let's make it silly, half the price of the next one, the next bidder, what would you do? When you have something which is so out of kilter with everybody else, you need to question whether or not the vendor really understands what you want. There could be things missing. And what will happen is, you'll nicely sign the contract with them, everything will start up, drink the warm champagne, in they come, and it all falls over very, very quickly. And they come back for you for relief on the contract. RFP process is to test the ability of the vendor to sell a solution. And so RFI, this is what we can broadly do. Then we check it out in some detail. Now the due diligence process is the test of the vendor's ability to deliver a solution now. Yeah? So can they do it now based on the information we have provided to them? So we need to check their capabilities to provide the proposed solution for us, not general, not for somebody else, but for us, and for us as the outsourcing company. There's often a disconnect between delivery and sales in most vendors. Different teams provide the proposals, and you need to check for general coherence, and it all stacks up and is sensible. Sales teams can often underbid or overcommit to get the deal, and we need to check that and really think about it. And not get overexcited as an outsourcer, a buyer, by, oh, this is a wonderful bid, I'm going to make myself look good, because in the end they can't do it. Yeah? You have to check that they can really do these things. Best sales presentation can win, not the best proposal. Is that fair? It's a risk, isn't it? You get some slick people coming in, perhaps with tattoos all over their arms, and show them how it all really works, and all the whiz-bang. Oh, it's a fantastic presentation, no idea what it was about, but it was great, and we give them the whole deal. Yeah, we have to be a little bit, grounded when we're looking at these, particularly with some of the guys I've seen give sales presentations. I'd buy from them, let alone, I'll have it. I'm not selling to you. Okay. One case study is about Sainsbury's, yeah? And it's, a lot of the issues in the Sainsbury's case are all about, not unsurprisingly, what we just discussed now, about vendor selection and scoping the service and managing things properly, yeah? And so tomorrow in the